Now, everyone is probably wondering at this point, where was the lead up? Where was the story? Well, I'm going to change things up, at least for this episode. We'll see how it goes. Probably talk a little bit more about news. We have so many things going on in our industry. The Boeing strike, right? Mechanics have been on strike now for a couple of months. I don't know. I mean, we had pretty much a monopoly at that point with Airbus, but it seems like everybody's come to some agreement, whichever side you stand on. Like I said, I think a healthy Boeing is good for everyone, but they've been on strike for a while. I've actually looked at investing into that stock, haven't done it. It's such an expensive stock anyways, probably buy one share of it. I think I've brought that up before. But no, it's crazy. We got that going on. I think we had a presidential election. I'm not sure. I saw something the day before the election that someone asked who was running for president or if Joe Biden had dropped out. So I think people are paying attention to the process here. But yeah, looks like probably a clean sweep for the Republicans between the Senate, the White House, and the House. So we'll see. I think they're still waiting to see on the House side of things if they're going to end up picking that all up. But indications look like they will on our side of the world. We've had a lot of conversations. We'll see where it goes. Could be at least some good things to help with some of the regulations that we deal with. There is a lot of bureaucracy on the federal side of the government. Sometimes we can wait 8, 9, 10 months just to get a decision on something, or they bounce it around or they point fingers. So, I'm not necessarily against a clean sweep. We'll see what ends up happening there. Elon Musk has said a few things, and I think one of his X platforms after Trump won was America was built on builders and let them build. So we got some big projects coming down the pipeline. Maybe that will help out in that. And stay optimistic. Why? That's what we're all supposed to do, right? But we'll see. It's what we're kind of settled with now, at least for the next couple of years when we talk about House and Senate races and 4 years in the White House. So we'll see. I do try not to get too political or let people know my political side to it. So we're taking everything with a half glass full mentality here. I'm going to say that this will probably be good for aviation. I saw the richest, I think the 6 richest billionaires went up in their value by $50 billion after Trump was elected president. So at least the rich are getting richer. And when you start talking about this industry, there's a lot of people with a lot of money. That's just the way it goes. If the first thing that someone who gets money does is they buy themselves an aircraft, right? That's the way it goes. So people with influence and people with money on both sides, all these celebrities that you see that slam climate change or whatever it might be, look at what they're doing. They're flying around in their private jets. So a little bit of hypocrisy that goes along with it. I think we all can be better stewards of the environment. However, transportation, I think collectively, and somewhere around 3% of the total emissions and greenhouse gases, where something like the garment industry is 10% of that. But it's very visual, and it turns into one of those things where people look at it and say, hey, what about that person? Why do they get to fly around the world and not have to sit in the middle seat with toenail clippings in the front by their Sky Mall? But so a lot of things happening there, a lot of good things. I was out at the National Business Aviation Association back in October. I think you talked about that a year ago too, but out there seeing at some of the new designs, some of the stuff that's coming down the pipeline. I'll probably talk about that more down the road, another episode, maybe with someone that actually was at that conference. But yeah, it was a good show. It was nice to see some of the things. Neil deGrasse Tyson was there. That's 2 years now. I guess NBAA find something they like and stick with it, right? I asked them about their keynote. I was like, well, wait a minute. Did we just hear from Neil deGrasse Tyson? Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, but hearing it 2 years now, his shtick doesn't change much, which is fine. It's a good shtick. But, it's kind of like going and seeing the same concert twice, which, by the way, I did go and see the Eagles when I was out there at the Sphere, talk about some amazing technology. And the interesting thing is, I know someone that actually lives by Don Henley. He lives above him in a penthouse in Dallas, so look at that. But yes, the show was good. They sounded good. The Sphere was all lit up and moving. So was happy to hear those type of things. And I mentioned in the past some of my travels to the Scottsdale, Phoenix area, but I don't know if anybody that listens to the show has seen, but there was a fatal crash at Falcon Field. Now that, if you remember right from some of those episodes I spoke about, Falcon Field is not actually one of the airports that I visited. When I was out there, I went to Deer Valley, Scottsdale, of course, Sky Harbor is what I flew into, and then down to Mesa, which Mesa, I've been there before. The interesting thing with the Mesa airport is they have a dual customs facility that has people from Mexico and people from the U.S. So in theory, they're clearing cargo from both regions. And when I worked in Laredo, Texas, we actually had the first one. They stole our idea and put it in Mesa, but fortunately, they never really got it off the ground. So we were over there really trying to figure out what they had going on and figure out if they were a threat, which at the time considered not. Nothing against them. Maybe they got it up and running. And now that I'm no longer in Laredo, whoever wins, wins. But back to the more somber note, Falcon Field, there actually was an aircraft crash there. And I listened to some of the tapes on the ATC, and it sounds like, as usual, air traffic control was way overworked, had so many things going on. The air traffic controller didn't even notice that the aircraft did an excursion off the end of the runway. So it was, they're setting up in the tower, working, I think it was 3 or 4 different aircrafts at once, and this was a departure off of their runway. Let's look a little bit at Falcon Field here while we're talking about it, because I actually don't know too much about Falcon Field. It's one of those airports. It's busy. I mean, I guess I don't, in Arizona, I don't know what wouldn't be a busy airport. But yeah, so it's Mesa, Arizona, Falcon Field. And, let's see a little bit about who's running this airport. It's in the heart of Phoenix, city of Mesa. Falcon Field is minutes from hotel and luxury resorts. Yep. 2 main runways, 5,100 feet and 3,800. The 5,100 foot runway is the runway that we had, the fatal crash off of. And in here, just trying to see on here if it's actually something that I noticed they didn't have EMAS, which for those of you that don't know, EMAS is Engineered Material Arresting Systems. They say you have to have 1,000 feet of runoff area at the end of your airport. So if you have one of these excursions, an excursion basically being where an aircraft leaves the runway, there's enough distance at the end of the runway for the aircraft to safely stop. And I think they try to peg around 98% of the time an aircraft would stay within that 1,000 feet. But if you don't have that, you have what they refer to as crushable concrete. And the crushable concrete allows an aircraft basically to go into the system and stop it rapidly. Kind of like when you see that same ideology of those runaway, try to say that a few times, runaway ramps like in Colorado for the semi-trucks. Very similar thought process where it slows it down. As a matter of fact, there's new material out there that is like bead-based, which is very much like those runoffs that happen for semis, where you go into it and the beads slow you down. So it's almost like glass, I think, that they have in there. But like in most cases, or at least the older technology, older is different and the same. You still see both these days. The crushable concrete operates the same way. But like I said, Falcon Field doesn't actually have that on their airport. So I'm going to probably do a little Google image here and see what the distance is for their runway to the road. So just looking at this airport, it's kind of the same as most airports, the style, which is where, they get a community on their back. And I'm sure this instance will be another one of those where they say it's completely unsafe, but nobody talks about the urban sprawl that's happened right to the end of the runway. I mean, it literally looks like there's homes right off of it. And actually, you know what? I want to take that back. It's not homes. It's actually trees. So as we're talking about this, but there is still the road. There's the road there. I wonder what this is actually. This is probably they probably sell trees in here. So I guess maybe like a nursery, but at least from my handy dandy measuring tool off of Google, it looks like we're at about 581 feet or so from runway 22 left to, I think the name of this road is Greenfield Road. And unfortunately, this aircraft, when it did its excursion, it went off the runway, off 22 left, and then went across the field and into the road and actually hit a passing vehicle. And the occupant of that vehicle was also deceased due to the accident. I think in total 5 perished, and there was one person, an 18-year-old, that they said did survive that was related to the pilot. Obviously it's tragic. You hear these things. Looking around through some of the certificates online, it says that they were flying Part 91, which would make sense. This is a Honda aircraft. Let me pull the type number here in a second so I don't misspeak, but Usually when you see someone that gets a little extra money in life, not saying that's his case, it could be something else, but they may upgrade from like a turbine aircraft, maybe like a King Air or a Cessna 310, into the Honda Jet. A little more aircraft, more operation. You don't really see those flying what they refer to as 135, which would be a charter operator. But in this 91, right, you have a little less restrictions. Maybe the people flying the aircraft have a little less experience. Hard to say. I don't know in this case. Just those are all theories based off of what kind of happens when you see this type of accident and crash. I mean, obviously they took up the runway. It looked like an aborted takeoff, maybe an aborted takeoff at the V1, which is rotation off the aircraft off the runway, which they say not to do. So if they did an aborted takeoff, that could be an issue. There could have been a weight and balance problem. They were leaving the Phoenix area and going to Utah back home where they live. So it's not too far of a flight. But again, if you're inexperienced, if you're putting more fuel on the aircraft because you're unaware, that could be what led to this accident. So the aircraft, I told you I would go and look to make sure I got the right model. It's the HA420. And if you've seen, it's a very distinctive model. It has the jet engines, typically when they're on the nacelle or the back of the aircraft on the aft end like that, they're, like a Learjet where they are attached to the aircraft. These engines actually sit on the wings. So they're in like a stab. Basically like a stabilizer that comes up from the wing. And I was told the ideology behind that was to try to make it as quiet in the cabin as possible for the passengers. So obviously if you have the engines set out further, they're not directly on the side of the aircraft, you would anticipate that it would be quieter in there. But in this case, like I said, this particular aircraft, they bought it in 2022, so February 17th of 2022, registered under the Iceman Holdings LLC out of Mesa, Arizona. But like I said, the people that were on board were actually living in Utah. But before that, two other owners dating back to 2006. So the registration on this aircraft is November 57 Hotel Papa. And like I said, when you listen to the air traffic controllers, they clear them for departure on 22 left. Controller starts working other aircraft. Some of the speculation I've heard from some of the people in the industry that I've talked to is, did they have any control locks put in? Were they overweight and balanced? Did they pour more fuel on? It does seem like there was more people on it for that type of aircraft. I'm not saying that it's not capable of holding it, but, also the more people you put on, the more critical you have to be with your weight and balance. Or was it, more aircraft and an aborted takeoff, but an aborted takeoff in a situation where, you really don't have the runway length that you need. Looking at this, so this is a city-run airport run by the city of Mesa. We talked about the runway configuration itself. They probably have what's referred to as a modification to standard from the FAA that allows them to operate the runway in this fashion. But, looking at it, I am surprised that they haven't attempted to try to get some sort of EMAS on the end of the runway just to help with this type of excursion. Those, like I said, the EMAS that I've been involved with before, I've seen aircraft go into them. It does work. It does slow them down, especially if a situation like this happens. It's not cheap, so that's part of the problem. Typically, these are funded by the FAA, but the FAA doesn't like to fund really as much general aviation airports. You've heard me get up on my soapbox about this before. The majority of airports in this country that are in what they call the NIPIS, the National Plan of Integrated Airport System, the majority of those airports, there's 3,300 roughly in that. Of that, 2,800 of those airports are general aviation or deemed general aviation. They get $150,000 a year in federal funding. Just for example, O'Hare got, I think this year alone, around $150 to $200 million in federal funding. So when you start talking about little airports, now you do get discretionary dollars. So you get $150,000 guaranteed, and then the rest of that is discretionary, but it's always someone's discretion, right? So you have someone, an administrator, whether it's at a state level or a federal level, depending on how the money flows. And maybe someday we can do a podcast about how revenue goes down from the airport improvement program into states and whatnot, if people are so interested. But in the crux of it, you have somebody, an administrator somewhere saying, yes, Falcon Field deserves to get this money, or no, they don't. Now, you do need to have the local staff. So in this case, it'd be city employees from the city of Mesa at the airport requesting funds for things like EMAS. And there's a lot of projects to go around. But, you could be up to $7-8 million for a bed at the end of your runway. And so it is a lot of money to ask for. But, obviously in instances like this, you got to wonder if it would have helped. I mean, looking at the trajectory, it looks like they were a bit askew, but I feel like it's possible it could have slowed them down. So I will be curious. We'll continue to monitor this one. Feel for the family. It's horrible. And then, the person just happened to be driving by the airport on the roadway system. It's just luck of the draw, which is very unfortunate. But it always makes you think, too, like we talk about our accidents, right? When you see an accident, what do you do and how do you avoid that in the future? And it's a reminder to all of us, that kind of human instinction, that if something's going wrong, especially if it was an aborted takeoff, once you're committed, right? And it's easy to say that unless you're in the instance, but we've talked about a lot of accidents and incidents on this podcast where you kind of have to check that in your own mind once you're committed to something, right? Whether that is you're taking off and you lose your engine and you're not above 1,000 feet, you're committed to finding a spot out in the distance and not back to the airport, as much as human intuition would want to make you go back. So, looking at this one, hopefully, I'm sure we'll get some answers as we go along and get some better ideas here so we can stop with some of the speculation. But, moving on to some of the other stuff that's happening out there. I did want to talk. We've talked about advanced air mobility a little bit on this podcast. I actually sit on the State of Illinois Advanced Air Mobility Group, working group, which is really, when you talk about something like a electric vertical lift takeoff vehicle, or eVTOL, it's basically just a fancy helicopter. They are less, they're more quiet, I should say. They're less noisy, but they're powered by electric engines. And so when you see these type of aircraft, they're emerging technology, and really what people want to do is they want to turn them into the Uber of the skies, which, by the way, let's just pause for a moment and talk about Uber. I use Uber Eats. That was for a while there. I was thinking, I don't know. I don't know if I want people coming over. But then when I realized, somebody told me that they could just drop the food off the door and you can go on your merry way. Well, that was just been phenomenal. But it's happened twice now, where on Uber Eats, you tip the driver before they get here, right? So 2 times now. Once when I was in Washington, I was at a conference out there. I think I spoke about this in this podcast out in Renton, because I do like to gripe a little bit on here. But they took the food, they took the tip, and then they never, and then in Washington, they never delivered the food. What just happened to me here in my home was they delivered somebody else's food. Now, you can get on Uber Eats and you can make a complaint. And Uber, thanks a lot for making it so difficult to actually talk to you about anything. Their app, I'm just going to say, sucks. They need to fix that thing, because it's so difficult to try to get any help on that. But what ends up happening, this is my biggest gripe, is, yeah, they'll give you a food credit back if it was an error, like in this case, it was an error, but they don't give you the tip money back. And they say, oh, no, you've already guaranteed that to the driver. Well, that's ridiculous. You need to change that policy, or tip after the fact, because it was both drivers' faults that the food didn't get there. In one case, they mistakenly gave me the wrong one. And in the other case, they just took off with it. So I don't think they deserve my money, and I don't think they deserve a tip. So if Uber, if you're listening to this podcast, fix that, please. Thank you. But I'll end on that gripe there. But where I got on that tangent is eVTOL, right? So eVTOL, that's what they basically are. They would want to be like an Uber of the skies. Now, actually, Uber did this, Uber Elevate. That folded up like me in a lawn chair. Went away. Now we're kind of at that point with eVTOLs where there's a lot of developers, right? Talk about like Studebakers, right? And most people are saying, what's a Studebaker? Well, there's a lot of, when automobiles came along, there's a lot of manufacturers. Most of them went away. And then we ended up with General Motors, and we ended up with Ford and Chrysler and a few selects. So this is kind of the example of that. We have a lot of people right now trying to develop eVTOL. We have a lot of people telling us they're going to be flying in 2 weeks. And then we have people saying, no, 20 years. Who knows, probably somewhere in between that, as they try to figure out how to actually get these things into the sky. At some point, they want them to be autonomous. I guarantee you very much at the beginning, they will have a pilot in them. We can't even necessarily figure out driverless vehicles on the road. I doubt that we're probably going to see that in the sky. I actually got dropped off by an Uber driver. This is turning into a whole Uber rant. I got dropped off by an Uber driver who was also, like, I guess, a retired scientist. And he was telling me how great his Tesla automobile is. And he was saying, look, I can put it autonomous and just let it drive home. Well, once it saw the leaves in the road, it stopped driving. So again, I go back and point to, I'm pretty sure there will be humans involved with this. But Uber Elevate had their business division of this, it went under. And more recently, one of the big players is in trouble. They're probably going to get delisted from the NASDAQ. And let's talk about them a little bit. I've seen these out at, we talked about NBAA, National Business Aviation Association. They bring them out. I don't even know. Neil deGrasse Tyson has gotten in some of these autonomous vehicles. He was just in another one since he came back year after year to do his presentation. Actually, I'll take that back. I think he was a year skipped. So it was like 1 year, 2, and then 3 he came back. But Lilium is a German manufacturer of these. They had a big order a while back with Saudi Arabia, right? Everybody's kind of getting options to buy them. You think airlines outlying areas, they can bring them into hub airports like O'Hare and drop people off. There is a market potentially for all these types of operators, but Lilium is one of those that is now in trouble. They were expecting that they were going to secure $150 million in debt from the German government. It didn't happen, and now it looks like they're suing everybody, and everybody's suing them. So this is the beginning of consolidation, which I think is just the natural progression of this market, right? You have too many people, over 100 people, trying to make them right now. Nobody's flying them. There's testing going on, but it probably will end up one of those scenarios where it's in a country with less regulations. But maybe that's us now. Like I said, now that Trump's going to strip it. We heard the Department of Education is out. We also heard that maybe the IRS is gone. So maybe the FAA will be completely revamped as well. Like I said, I will be the first to admit there is a ton of slowness on the FAA's part to get stuff out. It really starts to drive down the potential to get things like this into the sky. Not saying it doesn't need to be done safe and accurate, but you can also see there needs to be a balance between that and just shutting everything down. So we'll be curious, but on the eVTOL market side of the world, there's some shakeups happening. Lilium, its future is up in the air. No pun intended. Actually, not really, because they've never really been up in the air. They've done some testing, but we'll see where everything ends up. But yeah, it's a very interesting time. And like I said, I hope, for them that they do. I think that, this technology could be something that revitalizes, general aviation airports. They have a lot of targets on their back. A lot of people don't understand them. Most people move to a general aviation airport and then start complaining that the airport's there, not in my backyard syndrome. So we have a lot of that happening in our industry. So the more people we can get involved, the more we can get them around into aviation, I think the better off. As long as we all still have a spot for our type of flying, I'd say let's see where it goes. But it's an interesting ride. In other aircraft incident news, just within the last 24 hours, a company called Total Cargo, I've actually never heard of that, but is in Brazil, fire destroyed the 737-400 they were flying. So 2 crew members aboard the Total Cargo 737-400 RS managed to get the burning aircraft on the ground at Sao Paulo, Brazil, early Saturday morning before rappelling to safety from the window and emergency escape ropes. The pilots weren't hurt. So this is interesting. It said it was about an hour into flight. The 737-400 has a pretty good safety record. Again, we're taking assumptions here. So everybody taking assumptions. Cargo aircraft. We've heard some of these incidents before where cargo catches fire and destroys a cargo operator. That's why they're very finicky when it comes to actually what they're shipping. There was all of that conversation around that 747 that caught fire a while back, much while back. I think it was 80s or 90s. If they said there was contraband on the aircraft that the pilots weren't aware of, but in this case, like lithium batteries, that's right. That's when you go and you check in for a flight, they ask you what's in your checked luggage because lithium batteries have been known just to randomly catch fire. Looking at this incident, knowing it's in Brazil, maybe it's a spot where they weren't checking the cargo as much as maybe they do in other countries. Don't know. That's conjecture. But I would assume something in the back of this cargo aircraft caught fire rather than the aircraft itself. Time will tell if we're right. If we're right, we will say it. If we're wrong, we'll keep on moving. I kid. No, we will be upfront and honest about it. That's just the way that we are. At least as far as you know. We have a couple of things that's been within the last 24 hours. One within the last 3 hours. Aircraft taken off out of Rome hit a bird and caught fire in the engine. Not surprising. A Boeing 737-900, right? We've seen this before. Birds are a hazard. There's a lot of airports have wildlife biologists actually on staff. most airports that are at the NIPIS. If you remember from earlier what that acronym stands for, go back and listen. But they usually carry a wildlife hazardous management plan, or at least some verification of it. It's usually why you see in the chart supplement when you're flying into an airport, there's always that section that's kind of carte blanche that says that there's wildlife, birds within the vicinity of the airport. That way it's kind of a catch-all for pilots to be aware of it. But in this case, a 787-900 Dreamliner China, Hainan. I've worked at an airport where this airline's come in. I've always butchered that name. Feel free to look it up and tell me how wrong I am. But caught fire shortly after takeoff, landed safely back at the airport. And then the second thing, and then this is, it just seems like Boeing has, I don't know, maybe just look at the draw. And it's interesting because with Boeing, obviously, my first assumption was maybe Airbus was happy about it. But, seeing a lot of the news that's come out since then, the Analopoly, or the two company, is obviously better. They can't even take on the full product that Boeing wouldn't be producing. So it's not even like if Boeing's not producing aircraft, that is a boon for Airbus. So, but my general point here, and I feel like I'm riffing a lot like Donald Trump, so I apologize. I'll try to refocus. But as he likes to say, the weave, maybe this weave that I'm giving, it is all somewhat related. So it is a relatable weave to the scenario. But, in this case, it was a 737 that took off out of Australia, part of Qantas's fleet, and the blades on the right turbine engine started to snap off. Again, similar to what we're talking about with the Honda aircraft during V1, those pilots continued, they took off, and then they returned and landed safely, but they're trying to figure out what happened. This aircraft is 20 years old, but has good maintenance records. I guess they've been having some issues with their machinists as well and labor unions, but they're not contributing any of that to the issues that they saw on this aircraft. So another thing to monitor, but kind of two back to back again with Boeing. Obviously they can't control the birds, but they seem to be in the news. I was talking with somebody the other day where I said to them, you need to stay out of the limelight for like 12 months and nothing but, if anything, good stories, or nothing out of 12 months. But that's kind of the same I feel with Boeing. They just need to kind of refocus and focus in on what they do best. Speaking of which, Wheels Up is a 135 operator. They've been in hellacious issues for many years now. I don't think that they've ever turned a profit, but it seems like they're starting to turn things around a little bit. They got an infusion of cash from Delta Airlines. So Wheels Up is an interesting, they were charging rates that really, we talked earlier about flying 91, 135. So 135, part 135 is a federal regulation. And when you fly that, you're basically flying for hire. So instead of a scheduled airline, right, like I'm going to get on United and I'm going to fly out of O'Hare to Orlando at 4:21 p.m. No, that's 121, which is scheduled service. 135 is, hi, I want to charter a plane and I want to leave at 8 a.m. and I want to leave from Stark County, Indiana. You're basically directing and you pay for the aircraft to do that operation. Well, Wheels Up is that. They were always charging prices that all of us are scratching our heads in the industry saying, how are they doing this and making money? Well, they weren't. They were losing money. They're still losing money, but they're losing a lot less money. So we'll be curious to see where they end up going from here. They had a huge booth at NBAA, which they do every year, showcasing their aircraft and what they're doing. They're actually switching wheels now. They've had, some Citation X's, and I think they had some Sovereigns, but now they're switching to a very unique fleet, which is kind of following, if you will, the Southwest model, which we should talk about that too. But following a model with less aircraft, so you have to carry less materials around and you have to have less expertise on an array of aircraft and focus more on singular. So along with keeping their kind of flagship King Air aircraft, they're planning on buying 17 Phenom 300s and 300Es, which is a light jet. That deal is inked for $105 million. And they also will replace, we talked about this, Citation X, with the Challenger 300 and 350s, bringing their average fleet age to around 10 years. Now, the scuttlebutt behind this is that the CEO of Delta Airlines flies on Wheels Up, and that's where the infusion of cash came from. That, of course, is just rumor. I would not necessarily put any credence behind it, but what I will say is the investment in cash into this, I think what they're trying to do, and Delta is interesting. I don't know if they still do, but a fixed base operator, basically a glorified gas station. They fuel aircraft at airports. They operated one at a Cincinnati called Delta Elite. So it's not the first time that Delta Airlines has branched into something maybe beyond just scheduled airline service. But in this case, I think what they're trying to really go after here is that first class ticket passenger, right? So the type of fleet and aircraft wheels up fly, you're probably not going to go international with them, but you might want to go from, say, like Chattanooga to Atlanta on a King Air with wheels up, and then fly first class from Atlanta to London on a Delta flight. So it's kind of that, maybe that segment of the population that has enough net worth that can't own their own aircraft, but they do want to fly private to first class to wherever they're going in the world. So it's a gamble, but it's a risk. However, Delta's got some cash cow money right now to throw towards different projects. And we've talked about this with United, where they basically have invested in everything under the sun, but the supersonic jets, et cetera. So in this case, Delta's taking a tactic here to try to see if they can grab a segment of the flying population. So we'll see how this gamble works out for them. But like I said, they are losing money, but they're losing a lot less money. And maybe next year they'll be able to turn this into the black. So we'll keep our eye on wheels up and make sure they keep those wheels up unless they're landing. So I think we'll round out today's podcast on some political news because, as you know, I'm very... Pete Buttigieg currently is the Secretary of Transportation under the Biden administration. I think even if Harris would have won, it sounded like Pete Buttigieg was wanting to transition out of that role. It doesn't sound like it was a role he ever really wanted anyways. I think he would have wanted Secretary of State, and this was kind of the consolation prize for him to drop out of the primaries in the 2020 election, where ultimately Biden won. At the time, I think I mentioned this in another podcast, we all assumed that at that point, Pete Buttigieg would be eyed for a cabinet position, which is exactly what happened. And, Secretary of Transportation is an interesting role and position. The honest truth behind it is I think it's looked at as one of the lesser cabinet roles with an administration. But for my life, it's very important. And nothing against the politics aside, I think general aviation just wasn't probably something that Pete Buttigieg focused on. There was a lot of other stuff that took bandwidth, especially in, scenario we have re-election. It's hard. And it's hard to get a voice. When we had FAA reauthorization, we talked about it. General aviation is critical to the whole system working. And I think we take that for granted. So we'll see, but it's interesting because what I really was going to talk about was Representative Sam Graves, who's out of Missouri. He was on the Transportation Committee in the House. He did create the first general aviation title. I wish it would have gone a lot further. Like I said, there needs to be more entitlement dollars going to general aviation infrastructure. That didn't happen. But with that being said, he is a pilot himself. I think there's a little airport out there by Missouri where he actually fuels aircraft and stuff, so it's possible that you could see him in there. He's actually being eyed for a potential Trump cabinet position. I would just have to guess Secretary of Transportation would sound about right. Maybe not, maybe it's something else. But if that were to happen, let's hope maybe he can take some of that thought process and reapply it to, really helping out general aviation across the country. I think he's done a lot of good things so far with trying to champion it. Obviously, you're trying to change how a system works, and nothing against any Secretary of Transportation. But, like I said, it's something that, someone that has a real passion or role for, hopefully they're able to keep pushing dollars into our pockets because there is a lot of targets on aviation now. I work in the industry. It's, one of those things where I'm a recreational flyout. I like to do it. I would advocate it to more people. These are resources, and the reality is we're probably not really building much more airports. Nobody really wants them in their backyard. And so as we look at initiatives, things like transitioning away from leaded fuel, sustainable jet fuel, the industry is doing a really good job at it, but I would hope that we would continue to have advocacy on the federal level. And however you feel about politics, maybe this is an opportunity where we could really see some change. We'll find out. As with politics, you kind of have to hold your breath as you go. But in the transportation world, let's just see. I'm hoping, like I said, that we'll see some positive movements here. On this podcast, like I said, I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to talk more about, I get a lot of feedback into the comment section, people asking me where I'm at and what I'm doing. And, we focused a lot around stories. Not saying that we're not going to have stories, and we probably had some minor little stories in this episode today. But I really wanted to just more kind of just talk about things, and feel free to drop me a line, dapodcast85@gmail.com. If there's stuff you would like to talk about, things you want to hear about on the show, if you want us to get into any specific stories, you know what? And with that being said, we did have an email from someone. And so that person sent me an email, kind of basic conversation, but what they had asked me to do was highlight Crenshaw Memorial Airport. I guess it's the airport that they fly out of. So, Chad, to you out there, this is your shout out to the Crenshaw Memorial Airport. And, I said I was going to end on the Sam Graves political note, but let's end on a little viewer mail. I should say fan mail. I don't know. A lot of the mail that I get is what most people get in their emails. Do you have erectile dysfunction? Do you want to make 5,000% your profit? Use creatine. It's the best thing you don't know about. No. So when I cipher through all of that crap email, I finally end up in a position where I can actually, hey, this is a human being and they're writing me about something that they care about. So Chad, thank you for that. Thanks for throwing out. It's PRN is the identifier. So let's talk a little bit about it. I don't know, maybe there's a story here, Chad. Let's see if there's a mini story we could talk about with Crenshaw. Let's take a peek. And this is actually kind of cool because if there's people that are listening that fly, maybe you could add this to your list. If I ever find myself down in Alabama, maybe I will. Alabama is actually nice. They got some couple nice rest areas on US 10 if you're driving through from Florida westbound or going eastbound from the opposite side. I know you're probably saying to yourself, what are you talking about, rest stops? But that's it. They're a nice rest stop. Usually, some of the rest stops here in Illinois leave little to be desired. But Mac Crenshaw Memorial Airport, oh wow, it's actually fairly new. In 2001, the city of Greenville embarked on a series of projects. Wait, let's back that up. Not as new. 2001 is when they revamped it. They got a 3,800 foot runway. It looks like you got a nice little terminal here, nice little gas pump. I don't see anything on here about, Chad, I want to make sure that I'm doing your airport right. So as I go through the depths of their website, if there's anything on here that is of interest, but this is kind of cool. I kind of like highlighting the little airport. It kind of goes into our whole motif of who we are. Bruce Edwards is the manager of said Greenville, Alabama, the Chameleon City. Interesting. You'll get to hear my pronunciation and stuff as I look over. So it's definitely a city-run airport. The website feels very city-run. There is not much navigation to it. Let's see. The history of it, the airport was built by 1920. Wow, okay, this is an old airport. Congratulations. So, with that being said, they're 104 years old. We're going on 105. So this is an old airport. This is pretty cool. If you get a chance, it's the Mac Crenshaw Memorial Airport. Fly the Greenfield Airport in a Piper Cub, the safest instruction trainer built. Introductory offer, 15 minutes for $2.50. I'm assuming that's an old ad. Passenger flights. See your home from the air. Contact charter and cargo flights. Crop dusting, aerial photography, aircraft sales, and service. Your Greenfield Airport is now open and ready to serve you. Flyaway Aviation Service. This is pretty cool. I like this. Let's see what they have to say on AirNav. We will search actively together right now. Look at this. This is, I feel like Joe Rogan, only much less successful. I should get myself some giant sunglasses and a cigar in here. Or somebody to do this part for me. That way I don't have to go and search the annexes of the website and the world for all of you as we're live doing this, because I'm thinking of it myself. It is, It is interesting, isn't it? There's so many little airports. I mean, there's so much. When people ask me, I actually went up to Sheboygan. Might have mentioned that on here more recently. I haven't been out flying as much. Always want to fly more, but as the days get along, it turns into really one of those things. They got self-service 100 low lead, $5.50. That's a pretty good price. People that I know would probably be happy with. Well, let's just be honest. Most pilots are never happy with fuel prices. But yeah, no restaurant or anything, but it looks like some nice little attractions within the area. If you find yourself, like I say, in that Alabama region, it's kind of northern in the state near, Montgomery. But yeah, so Chad, thank you for sending that out. I will go back and say, if anybody wants to take a look at this, it's the Mac Greenshaw Memorial Airport. If anybody ends up flying in there because of this podcast, fantastic. Again, if anybody has anything they want to talk about, if you want to tell me to go screw myself, maybe I'll even read that over this, if you so choose. But for now, I think I've talked enough about it. We'll try to get back onto a regular schedule. Like I said, it's one of those things where, life kind of gets ahead of me. And then I'm sitting here thinking to myself, have I really gotten time around today that I would like to get on and do a podcast? And more than often than not, no, I don't. I end up wanting to do something else. The other day I was installing a new light in the house. So sometimes it seems like everything else kind of comes before I get to the point to do the podcast. But I appreciate anybody that's tuned back in. And until next time, my friends, I will see you down the runway.